Most men believe they are in control of their lives until the moment they lose their temper over something trivial. They convince themselves they have mastered their emotions until a single comment from a stranger ruins their entire day. They think they are disciplined until one setback makes them abandon everything they have been building. I have watched this pattern repeat itself countless times across decades of studying human behavior, and I have come to understand something fundamental about the modern condition. We are living in an age of emotional fragmentation. People walk around believing they are strong, yet they crumble at the smallest inconvenience. They present themselves as confident, yet they seek validation in every interaction. They claim to be independent, yet their mood depends entirely on circumstances beyond their control. This is not weakness in the traditional sense. It is something far more insidious. It is the illusion of control masking a complete absence of emotional sovereignty. The modern world has taught us to react instead of respond, to feel instead of think, to justify instead of examine. We have become prisoners of our own nervous systems, slaves to impulses we never questioned, hostages to emotions we never learned to govern, and the cost of this imprisonment is staggering. It shows up as anxiety that appears without warning, as anger that erupts without proportion, as sadness that lingers without reason, as frustration that builds without release. The mind becomes a battlefield where we are constantly fighting against ourselves, exhausted by conflicts we did not choose and cannot win. I spent years believing I could simply will myself into emotional control. I thought discipline was about suppression, about building walls high enough to keep feelings out. I was wrong. What I discovered instead changed everything I understood about human nature and personal power. Emotional control is not about eliminating feelings. It is about understanding the architecture of your own mind well enough to choose which emotions deserve your energy and which ones deserve your indifference. The enemies in this battle are not the emotions themselves. The true enemies are ignorance, reaction, and unconsciousness. Ignorance about how your mind actually works. Reaction as your default mode of operation. Unconsciousness as your habitual state of being. These three forces work together to keep you trapped in patterns you inherited from childhood, absorbed from culture, and reinforced through repetition. They make you believe that losing control is inevitable, that emotional storms are natural, that you are simply the kind of person who gets upset easily. This is a lie, and recognizing it as a lie is the first step toward freedom. The psychological price of living without emotional mastery is profound. It creates a life of constant tension where you are always one trigger away from collapse. You cannot build anything lasting because your foundation is unstable. You cannot form deep relationships because people cannot trust your consistency. You cannot pursue ambitious goals because your energy is consumed by managing crises of your own creation. You become someone even you do not want to be around. And in the quiet moments when the noise finally stops, you look at yourself and wonder how you became so fragile, so reactive, so controlled by forces that should be beneath you. I am Dale Carnegie, and I have spent my life studying what separates those who master themselves from those who remain forever at the mercy of their impulses. What I learned is not complicated, but it is profound. And it begins with understanding that emotional discipline is not a talent you are born with. It is a skill you develop through awareness, practice, and ruthless honesty about your own patterns. There are 10 lessons I have extracted from decades of observation, teaching, and personal struggle. These are not theories. They are principles that work in the real world, with real people facing real pressures. They are not easy, but nothing worth having ever is. And they will demand something from you that most people are unwilling to give. The courage to look at yourself clearly and the commitment to change what you see. The first lesson is this: you cannot control what you do, not understand. Most people lose emotional control because they have no idea how their emotions actually function. They experience anger as something that happens to them, a force that overtakes their rational mind without warning. They feel anxiety as an external attack rather than an internal process. They treat sadness as proof that something is wrong with their life, when often it is simply the result of exhaustion, poor sleep, or unprocessed stress. The mind is not mysterious. It follows patterns. It responds to triggers. It operates according to rules you can learn. But first you must study yourself with the same objectivity you would study a machine. What situations consistently trigger you? What time of day are you most vulnerable? What thoughts precede your emotional breakdowns? Most people never ask these questions because asking requires admitting you are not already in control. But this admission is not weakness. It is the beginning of strength. I once knew a man who prided himself on his calm demeanor until someone questioned his competence at work. The moment that happened, he would explode with a rage so disproportionate that it destroyed relationships and opportunities. He could not understand why this kept happening. To him, the anger felt justified in the moment. It was only when he began tracking his emotional patterns that he realized the truth. The anger was not about competence at all. It was about a belief he formed in childhood that being questioned meant being unloved. His professional life was being sabotaged by a story a frightened child told himself 40 years ago. This is how the mind works. It layers meaning onto neutral events until those events become unbearable. Understanding this process gives you the power to interrupt it. The second lesson follows naturally from the first. Your emotions are not facts. This sounds obvious until you are in the grip of a strong feeling. When you are angry, the anger tells you that you have been wronged and that retaliation is justified. When you are anxious, the anxiety tells you that danger is imminent and that you must act immediately. When you are sad, the sadness tells you that your life is meaningless and that nothing will ever improve. These are not observations. They are interpretations generated by a nervous system that evolved to keep you alive in environments that no longer exist. Your ancestors needed instant, emotional responses because hesitation meant death. You do not. You live in a world where most threats are social, psychological, and imaginary. But your body has not caught up to this reality. It still floods you with cortisol when someone disagrees with you on the internet. It still triggers fight or flight when your boss sends a vague email. Learning to separate the signal from the noise is essential. Not every emotion deserves your belief. Some emotions are simply weather passing through your nervous system. You do not cancel your plans because of clouds. You should not abandon your principles because of feelings. The third lesson is about reaction versus response. There is a space between stimulus and reaction, and in that space lies all of your power. Most people collapse this space entirely. Something happens, and they react instantly. Someone insults them, and they lash out. Someone disappoints them, and they withdraw. Someone challenges them, and they become defensive. This is not living. This is being a puppet controlled by external circumstances. Reaction is automatic. Response is chosen. Reaction comes from the oldest part of your brain, the part that thinks in terms of survival and threat. Response comes from the newest part, the part capable of reason, planning, and self-awareness. Developing the ability to pause, even for 3 seconds, between what happens and what you do next, is transformative. In those 3 seconds, you can ask yourself a simple question. Is this reaction aligned with who I want to be? Most of the time, the answer will be no, and that awareness alone will change your behavior. I have tested this principle under extreme conditions. I have been publicly insulted, professionally betrayed, and personally attacked. In each case, my first impulse was to strike back with equal force. But I learned to pause. I learned to breathe. I learned to ask myself, what do I want to be true 5 years from now? Do I want to be someone who responded with dignity or someone who escalated conflict? The moment you ask that question, your perspective shifts. The insult becomes smaller. The betrayal becomes information rather than injury. The attack becomes noise you can ignore. This does not mean you become passive. It means you become strategic. You respond from strength rather than wound. The fourth lesson is that emotional control begins with physical control. Your mind and body are not separate systems. They are interconnected in ways modern culture tries to ignore. You cannot think clearly when you are exhausted. You cannot remain calm when your blood sugar crashes. You cannot maintain perspective when you have not moved your body in days. The brain is an organ that requires specific conditions to function optimally. Sleep, nutrition, movement, sunlight. These are not optional extras. They are the foundation upon which everything else rests. I have watched brilliant people sabotage themselves through neglect of the basics. They stay up until 2 in the morning scrolling through screens, then wonder why they feel anxious. They eat processed food for every meal, then wonder why they feel depressed. They sit motionless for 12 hours a day, then wonder why they feel restless and irritable. The body keeps score. And when you ignore its needs, it responds with emotional chaos. There is a reason ancient wisdom traditions emphasized physical discipline. They understood that the mind follows the body. When you are strong, rested, and vital, your emotional resilience multiplies. When you are weak, depleted, and sedentary, every small problem feels insurmountable. This is not about aesthetics or performance. This is about creating the biological conditions for mental stability. You do not need to become an athlete. You need to move daily, sleep adequately, and fuel yourself properly. These simple acts are radical in their impact. They give you a baseline of stability that protects you from the emotional turbulence that destroys others. The 5th lesson concerns the power of reframing. Most emotional suffering comes not from events themselves, but from the stories you tell about those events. Someone rejects you and you tell yourself you are unlovable. Someone succeeds where you failed and you tell yourself you are inadequate. Someone criticizes you and you tell yourself you are worthless. These narratives are not neutral descriptions. They are interpretations loaded with meaning you added. The event itself is just data. What you make it mean determines whether it empowers or destroys you. Learning to question your interpretations is one of the most powerful tools you can develop. When something happens that triggers you, pause and ask, what story am I telling myself about this? Is this story serving me? Is it even true? Usually you will discover that your story is one of many possible interpretations, and it is almost never the most useful one. I worked with a woman who experienced severe anxiety every time she had to speak in public. She interpreted nervousness as proof that she was not capable, that people would judge her, that she would embarrass herself. This interpretation created a feedback loop where the anxiety itself became evidence of her inadequacy. When we examined this pattern, I asked her a simple question. What if nervousness is not a sign of weakness, but a sign that you care deeply about doing well? What if it is energy your body is giving you to perform at your best? The moment she reframed anxiety as useful rather than threatening, her entire experience changed. The nervousness did not disappear, but it stopped controlling her. It became something she could work with rather than something she had to fight. The 6th lesson is about the danger of emotional accumulation. Most people who lose control do not explode because of a single event. They explode because of 100 unprocessed events that accumulated over time. Every small irritation you suppress, every minor disappointment you ignore, every tiny resentment you swallow, adds weight to an invisible burden you carry everywhere. Eventually, something insignificant becomes the final straw, and you erupt with a force that shocks everyone, including yourself. The solution is not to explode more often, it is to process regularly. Emotional hygiene is as important as physical hygiene. You brush your teeth every day because you do not want decay to build up. You need to clear emotional residue for the same reason. This means acknowledging what bothers you, expressing it appropriately, or releasing it consciously. It means not letting things fester. It means dealing with small problems before they become large ones. Many people avoid this because they believe acknowledging negative emotions makes them more powerful. The opposite is true. Ignored emotions gain power. Acknowledged emotions lose it. When you name what you feel and why you feel it, you take away its mystery and much of its control over you. You can say to yourself, I am irritated right now because I am tired, and this situation is demanding more of me than I have to give. That simple acknowledgement prevents the irritation from becoming rage. It gives you information you can use to make better decisions. Maybe you need rest, maybe you need to set a boundary, maybe you need to change your expectations. But you cannot take any of those actions if you are pretending everything is fine. The 7th lesson is that emotional mastery requires solitude. You cannot develop self-awareness in constant noise. The modern world is designed to keep you distracted, entertained, and externally focused at all times. Social media, news, streaming, notifications. There is always something demanding your attention. And in that constant stimulation, you lose contact with yourself. You stop noticing what you actually think and feel because you are too busy consuming what others think and feel. This is not accidental. A distracted person is an easy person to control. A person who never sits with their own mind is a person who never questions the programming they have received. Solitude is where you reclaim yourself. It is where you separate your authentic thoughts from the noise you absorbed. It is where you discover what you actually believe versus what you were taught to believe. I am not talking about isolation or loneliness. I am talking about deliberately creating time where you are alone with your thoughts, without input, without distraction, without escape. This could be a walk without headphones. This could be sitting in silence for 10 minutes each morning. This could be journaling without agenda or performance. What matters is that you create space to observe yourself without judgment. In that space, patterns become visible, triggers become clear, motivations become obvious. You start to see the gap between who you are and who you have been pretending to be. And that seeing is the beginning of change. The 8th lesson is that emotional control is not about never feeling. It is about feeling without being controlled by the feeling. This distinction is crucial. Many people hear emotional discipline and think it means becoming cold, detached, or robotic. They think it means suppressing all feelings in pursuit of some stoic ideal. This is not discipline. This is dissociation, and it leads to a different kind of breakdown, one that is quieter but just as destructive. True emotional mastery means feeling everything fully while maintaining your capacity to think clearly and act wisely. You can feel deep sadness and still show up for your responsibilities. You can feel intense anger and still speak with respect. You can feel overwhelming fear and still move forward. The feeling does not dictate the action. Your values do. Your principles do. Your commitment to who you want to become does. This requires practice. It requires you to sit with uncomfortable emotions without trying to fix them immediately. It requires you to recognize that discomfort is not danger. Most people cannot tolerate even mild discomfort. The moment they feel slightly anxious, they reach for their phone. The moment they feel slightly bored, they turn on a screen. The moment they feel slightly lonely, they scroll through social media. This constant avoidance trains your nervous system to treat normal emotions as emergencies. It makes you weaker over time, not stronger. Building emotional resilience means increasing your capacity to be with difficulty without needing to escape it. The more you practice this, the less power any single emotion has over you. The 9th lesson addresses the role of purpose in emotional stability. People without clear direction are emotionally fragile because they have no framework for evaluating what matters and what does not. Every setback feels catastrophic because they have no larger context to place it in. Every criticism cuts deep because they have no solid sense of self to anchor to. Every disappointment feels personal because they have no mission bigger than their immediate comfort. Purpose is not about grand ambitions or world-changing goals. It is about knowing why you are here and what you are building. It is about having a reason to get up that goes beyond pleasure or avoidance of pain. When you have purpose, emotional control becomes easier because you can measure everything against a single question. Does this serve what I am building or not? If someone insults you, and the insult does not serve your purpose, you can dismiss it. If an opportunity requires sacrifice and the sacrifice serves your purpose, you can embrace it. Purpose gives you a decision-making filter that cuts through emotional noise. I have observed that people who live with clear purpose experience far fewer emotional crises than those who drift. This is not because their lives are easier. It is because they have developed the ability to categorize events as either relevant to their mission or irrelevant distractions. When something is irrelevant, it loses its power to disturb you. This is not callousness. It is clarity. It is understanding that your attention is finite and should be directed toward what actually matters rather than scattered across every stimulus that demands a reaction. The 10th and final lesson is the hardest to accept, but the most liberating to apply. You are not entitled to emotional comfort. The belief that you should always feel good, that life should be easy, that circumstances should accommodate your preferences, is a modern delusion that creates immense suffering. Life is difficult, relationships are complicated, work is demanding, aging is humbling, loss is inevitable. These are not problems to solve. They are conditions to accept. When you operate from the assumption that discomfort is abnormal, you are constantly fighting reality, and reality always wins. Emotional control comes from accepting that life will frequently be uncomfortable and choosing to live fully anyway. It comes from understanding that your feelings about a situation do not change the situation. It comes from recognizing that maturity is not about eliminating challenges, but about developing the capacity to meet them without falling apart. This acceptance is not resignation. It is realism. It is the difference between a child who throws a tantrum when things do not go their way and an adult who adjusts their approach based on circumstances. The child believes the world should bend to their will. The adult understands they must bend themselves to reality. This does not mean becoming passive or defeated. It means becoming adaptable, resilient, and strategic. It means directing your energy toward what you can control and releasing your attachment to what you cannot. These 10 lessons form a complete system of emotional governance. They work together, each one reinforcing the others. Understanding without response is useless. Response without physical stability is unsustainable. Stability without purpose is hollow. Purpose without acceptance is frustrating. Together, they create a foundation for a life lived with intention rather than reaction, with clarity rather than chaos, with power rather than victimhood. The implementation of these principles is not complicated, but it is demanding. It requires you to become conscious in moments when unconsciousness would be easier. It requires you to pause when every instinct screams at you to react. It requires you to examine yourself when self-deception would be more comfortable. It requires you to build new patterns when old patterns have the weight of decades behind them. This is not work that happens overnight. This is work that happens in 1,000 small moments where you choose differently than you have before, where you notice the trigger and do not pull it, where you feel the impulse and do not act on it, where you recognize the story and do not believe it. The transformation is gradual, but it is absolute. You will notice it first in small ways. A situation that would have ruined your day barely registers. A comment that would have triggered hours of rumination passes through you like wind. A setback that would have sent you spiraling becomes simply information you use to adjust your approach. Over time, these small victories accumulate into a fundamentally different way of being. You become someone who can be trusted to remain steady under pressure, someone who can be counted on to think clearly in crisis, someone who models for others what emotional maturity actually looks like. This does not make you invulnerable. You will still feel pain. You will still experience loss. You will still face situations that test everything you have built. But you will face them as someone who has chosen to be the master of their internal world rather than a slave to it. And that choice, repeated consistently over time, creates a life that is fundamentally different from the lives most people settle for. A life where you are no longer controlled by the whims of circumstance or the opinions of others. A life where your emotional state is something you cultivate rather than something that happens to you. A life where you have claimed sovereignty over the one domain you actually have power in, your own mind. The world will not reward this work. Society does not celebrate emotional mastery the way it celebrates wealth or status or beauty. Most people will not notice the battles you win against yourself because those battles are invisible. But you will know. And that knowing will give you a peace that no external achievement can match. It will give you a confidence that does not depend on validation. It will give you a resilience that cannot be broken by circumstances. I have seen what happens to people who never develop this discipline. They spend their lives being pushed around by forces they refuse to understand. They wonder why success feels empty. They wonder why relationships keep failing. They wonder why nothing seems to work despite their efforts. The answer is always the same. They never learn to govern themselves. They remain children in adult bodies, demanding that reality accommodate their feelings instead of adjusting their feelings to reality. And eventually reality stops being patient. Eventually the consequences of emotional immaturity compound into outcomes that cannot be undone. But I have also seen what happens to those who commit to this path. I have watched people transform from reactive, volatile, and controlled by circumstance into calm, purposeful, and unshakable in their core. I have seen them build lives that reflect their deepest values because they were no longer distracted by every emotional impulse. I have seen them form relationships of genuine depth because they could finally show up consistently. I have seen them achieve goals that seemed impossible because they stopped sabotaging themselves through poor emotional management. This transformation is available to anyone willing to do the work. It does not require special talent or unique circumstances. It requires honesty, awareness, and the willingness to choose differently than you have before. The question you must answer for yourself is simple. Are you willing to take responsibility for your emotional life, or will you continue to blame circumstances, other people, and bad luck for your inability to maintain control, because that is the dividing line. Those who master themselves take responsibility. Those who remain slaves make excuses. There is no middle ground. You are either actively developing your capacity for self-governance, or you are passively surrendering to every trigger that comes your way. And the life you end up with will be a direct reflection of which path you chose. I cannot make this choice for you. I can only show you that the choice exists and what lies on either side of it. On one side is a life of emotional chaos, where you are constantly at the mercy of your own reactions, where relationships are unstable because people cannot predict how you will respond, where opportunities are lost because you cannot maintain composure under pressure, where your potential remains forever unrealized because you are too busy managing emotional crises to build anything lasting. This is the default path. This is where you end up if you do nothing. On the other side is a life of emotional sovereignty, where you have learned to feel without being controlled, to react without losing yourself, to face difficulty without collapsing, where you have built the internal capacity to remain steady regardless of external circumstances, where you have developed the self-awareness to catch your triggers before they catch you, where you have created a foundation so solid that nothing life throws at you can shake your core. This is the earned path. This is where you arrive through consistent, conscious effort over time. Everything I have shared with you comes from experience, both my own and that of thousands I have worked with over the years. These principles have been tested in the real world under real pressure. They work, but they only work if you apply them. Knowledge without application is worthless. Understanding without practice is just entertainment. You can read this and feel inspired for a day, then return to your old patterns. Or you can read this and make a decision that today is the day you stop losing control, that today is the day you reclaim sovereignty over your emotional life, that today is the day you commit to becoming the person you were always capable of being. The journey will not be easy, but it will be worth it. The work will not be quick, but it will be permanent. The effort will not be comfortable, but it will be transformative. And when you look back years from now at the person you were before you made this commitment, you will barely recognize them. You will see someone who was controlled by circumstances you now navigate with ease. Someone who was triggered by things that no longer touch you. Someone who lived in constant emotional turbulence that you have replaced with steady clarity. And you will understand that this transformation was not about becoming someone else. It was about finally becoming yourself. This is your choice to make. This is your life to build. This is your mind to master. No one can do this work for you, but I can tell you with absolute certainty that if you commit to this path, if you apply these lessons consistently, if you refuse to make excuses and instead make progress, you will never again be someone who loses control. You will become someone who cannot be shaken, someone who has learned to remain standing regardless of what tries to knock you down, someone who has claimed the only freedom that truly matters, freedom from the tyranny of your own unexamined impulses. Think about that. Examine yourself. Choose wisely.